Good morning, everyone, and good morning, Valerie. And let's see, 53 years ago, 53 and a half years ago, we met at a dance, and the first question I asked her, just to make conversation going, this is the first time I knew her, I just says, so what do you want to be when you grow up? And she said, a mommy. Long story short is I've fulfilled her wildest dreams. We have 11 children, and we're expecting number 54 grandchild. So, wow, it's amazing what a question and follow-up can lead to. But with all of those kids, and we were pretty rebels, I think she was made for this sort of thing. So we were in the hospital. She had just delivered our first child, and I kid you not, she says, that was fun. Let's do that again. And she had him so easy, and then we got into kind of alternative stuff. We read the book Confessions of a Medical Heretic by Dr. Mendelsohn, and then we just started having him at home. And so a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about was just we never got into that and didn't really think too much about it. So that's some of our rebels. We did think a lot about it and just had some decided cause of benefit, risk, and things. We just thought let's do our part. So let me get into this. Maybe to kick this off a little bit, business. And ultimately, when you have products and you have people, it comes into a business. So what would be the ultimate business model? I'm going to read this, and this is actually taken from the book Vaccines, Amen. But think about, the ideal business environment for growth. So think about this. The ideal business, imagine a business model. We create a product, perhaps even using government money to create that. The government is going to market it for us using taxpayer dollars. Payment is guaranteed, again, through taxpayer dollars. The government is going to mandate that this product for every American, consequences of not would be possibly school expulsion, losing your job for noncompliance, and the government is going to grant full immunity for any liability for harms, no matter how bad the injuries. How would you react? Many people would call it unbelievable, something no rational marketplace would ever allow. Yet this is the very structure under which pharmaceutical companies profit from vaccines today. In 2019 alone, Pfizer reported $6 billion in revenue from one childhood vaccine. So pause and consider, why would a mandated product with free marketing, guaranteed sales, and constant assurances of safety require immunity from liability in order to remain profitable? Today, the clinical trials and studies surrounding vaccines are paid for by pharma, designed by pharma, overseen by pharma-funded vaccinologists, and ultimately published in pharma-funded journals. Federal health agencies then depend on this pharma-funded and pharma-curated body of research to make critical decisions, approvals, recommendations, and even mandates, directly shaping pharmaceutical profits as well as the rights and lives of people across America and around the world. Okay, Vaccines, Amen. I can recommend that book. But here's a thing that is in there that I think a lot about. You are about to learn things that you can never unlearn. And this is something that he talks in there. Ever hear, I believe in cars, or I believe in tools? Probably not, but people routinely say, I believe in vaccines. This saying carries a truism because claims about vaccines require faith, belief. It is why challenging these claims often results in an emotional, not a logical reaction. Now, the book is written by Siri. I first thought that, but this is actually Aaron Siri, brilliant attorney, and a lot of his practice focuses on civil rights, informed consent, lots of class action, and very complex civil litigation. He's done some landmark things in high-profile cases with vaccines specifically. Now, here's the thing that I think is really interesting is he had the opportunity to depose the world's leading vaccinologist. Now, this is a guy, Stanley Plotkin, has over 60 years of being involved in pretty much, they call him the godfather of vaccines. He's the guy. That's very interesting. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Because of what's been happening lately, though, it's very interesting. Just the last year, CDC, WHO, the food pyramid's been turned upside down, all sorts of things, just an awakening. And if you go to CDC, which is what has to do with vaccines, and look up vaccine safety, they used to say vaccines do not cause autism. There's been a rewrite. And so in there, if you go to vaccine safety, you'll say the claim vaccines do not cause autism, which was there. They said it is not evidence-based because studies have not ruled out the possibility, because there's no studies. But it actually goes on and makes this comment, which I've changed and put in red. This webpage has been updated because the statement vaccines do not cause autism is not an evidence-based claim. Scientific studies have not ruled out the possibility that infant vaccines contribute to the development of autism. However, this statement has historically been disseminated by the CDC and other federal health agencies within HHS to prevent vaccine hesitancy. So there you go. And over half of the parents of children that have actually been challenged with specifically autism, I believe there is a correlation. I'm surprised it's only half. That's the typical scenario, is you have a healthy kid and everything's fine, you go in and get the battery vaccines and everything goes awry. But think about this right here. Okay, chronic disease among children has exploded from less than 10% in the 1980s to over 40%. Chronic disease among children, 40% in 2025. Many of these chronic diseases are disclosed in vaccine package inserts. And if you think of what these problems are, you could typically relate them to some form of immune dysregulation. What could cause immune system dysregulation en masse? Maybe look at products specifically intended to modify the immune system. Vaccines. Here's something that's really eye-opening. 1986, look how many vaccines they had on the chart. And look at it in 2025. And here's the thing from Aaron Siri. It is believed through repetition, not facts, not reality, not data, just repetition. This is really something to think about. And in fact, let me actually go into the book itself. I want to share some stuff with you that I think is really interesting. So he had the opportunity to depose Stanley Plotkin, and this is pretty interesting. So as I prepared, what kept gnawing at me, because he was going to have 9 hours with him, and let's see, there we go. He's going to have 9 hours with this man and asking everything under oath. He says, I had carefully reviewed available official, government, and pharma sources regarding vaccines, and they reflected serious safety gaps. But given Dr. Plotkin and his kin's confident public statements about vaccine safety, I had to assume he knew something I had missed. Maybe he had some special inside information. Presumably he did, because my review of the primary sources, there appeared to be at best an incredible gaps in the trials and data supposedly supporting vaccine safety. As the date for the deposition arrived, I concluded my research and finished out my outline and exhibits to address the key questions, and went to bed the night before the deposition. I felt well prepared, yet I expected surprises, twists, unexpected facts, some special inside information that would throw me for a loop. However, during my 9-hour exchange with Dr. Plotkin, I was met with none of that. Instead, I was left astonished that the worst fears expressed concerning safety gaps related to childhood vaccines were not only true, they were worse than I have imagined. This is no doubt why the other side of the family in that law case were so impassioned. It seems the more educated parents are, the more knowledgeable everything, the more they're a little more adverse to this. Anyway, I'm just going to jump ahead here. There's just a lot of the Q&A going back and forth in that deposition. But let's see if I can find the importance of clinical trials. Oh, and along that way, I think that's really fascinating. Let's go, let me back up just a little bit. Over the first 2 hours of the deposition, it went through this, what he says, a long line of incestuous conflicts with pharma companies, pretty much all of them. These companies, he consulted with them for decades, sat on their boards and received an undisclosed portion. As an example, there's a vaccine, rubella, rotavirus, and rabies. The royalties were $182 million, and he received an undisclosed portion. And so he's, over the years, made millions of dollars. And so Dr. Plotkin rose to the top of vaccinology pyramid because his approach and views aligned with the interest of pharma, while Dr. Plotkin would no doubt strenuously disagree. He was curated by pharma, not the other way around, and rose to his ranks because of pharma's patronage. So, wow, here's just a thought right here. Money the expert witness receives from a company profiting from the product would obviously be considered relevant as to whether the expert may have a bias. And so it's just lots of biases here. But going back to that idea of the perfect business model, so here's the thought right here, the importance of clinical trials and vaccine safety before you launch it. But what if there's no liability or anything? And so here's the Q&A with Dr. Plotkin. Before vaccines are licensed, they go through clinical trials to confirm their safety, right? Correct. These clinical trials assess if there are any harm caused by the vaccine, correct? Yes. In order to establish whether it's causal between the vaccine and the condition, you need a randomized placebo-controlled study. Yeah. But that was not done with this hepatitis B vaccine before licensure, was it? No. Okay. And given the vaccine now appears on the CDC's recommended list, that just is really weird when you think about that. So here's it comes down to this. Our exchange regarding the licensure gives a window into how Dr. Plotkin and his disciples approach vaccine safety in clinical trials. They conduct as little safety review as possible to avoid potential safety issues that could prevent licensure. Remember, pharma companies seeking licensure for a vaccine and hoping to earn billions if it is licensed, it's all about funding these trials, and because these companies are not concerned about liability after licensure due to that 1986 rule, it makes financial sense for them to select and pay vaccinologists that will conduct the trial to avoid potential safety issues. And okay, going back to just this, the deposition on the Hep B vaccine, you would think it would be, and this is part of the interview, it says you would think something like that, a new vaccine would be licensed based on a robust multi-year placebo-controlled trial. Think about it. Many chronic diseases that plague children are not diagnosed until a few years of age. So if the trial is not reviewing safety for at least a few years, they can't possibly determine whether a new vaccine could be contributing to potential harms. Okay. Here's the exchange with Dr. Plotkin about that Hep B, and just ponder this. How long would you assume that the study was done? And so here we go. Question, Dr. Plotkin. Earlier you testified that there are 2 Hep B vaccines on the market. Yes? Okay, moving up here a little bit. Let's see. When you look at the clinical trials which were done pre-licensure for recombinant HB, how long does it say the safety was monitored for each dose? 5 days. So the trial was not months or years, it was 5 days. Question is, 5 days long enough to detect adverse reactions that occur after 5 days? No, they would be reported separately as observed in the clinic. Question, in the manufacturing insert, which under code blah, 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 does it provide anything other than the 5 days of monitoring after each of these doses as far as adverse events? It does not specifically say that, no. Okay, is 5 days long enough to detect an autoimmune response that arises after 5 days? No. Is 5 days long enough to detect any neurological disorder that arose from the vaccine after 5 days? No. There's no control group, correct? No, let's see. No, it doesn't mention any control group. This is dumbfounding. And there wasn't anything other than just the 5 days, no follow-up at all. Watching the video, it is plain that Dr. Plotkin was surprised at the duration of safety monitoring. The fact that he seemed surprised while I had known about this alarming safety gap for years was shocking. This is literally the man whom the CDC and medical community look to as the world's leading authority on vaccines. This is likely beyond the greatest fears of most vaccine skeptics. I don't think that almost anyone, absent seeing it with their own eyes, would believe that the FDA they would license a vaccine injected into newborns on the first day of life based on a clinical trial that monitors safety for 5 days after the injection. It's just creepy. It's just so creepy. But anyway, and then you think of all the immunological problems that happen later on, and they're taking something that modifies the immune system. Got a couple of more slides here. Let's see. Oh, that's not what I was looking for. Okay, this is really fascinating. So here's 3 notable journals that are very respected. And so here's the thing, I'll just read this right here, looking at these journals. Pharmaceutical control over major medical journals is a core pillar of the industry's business model. Trial results and studies that justify vaccine policies and ultimately drive vaccine sales are published in journals such as Lancet, New England Journal of Medicine, and Journal of American Medical Association. And who effectively guides and funds these publications? Who does? Largely the pharmaceutical industry. Lancet editor Richard Horton described this troubling reality, and he stated that medical journals have devolved into information laundering operations for this pharmaceutical industry. A year later, Richard Smith, editor of British Medical Journal for 25 years, wrote that medical journals are an extension of the marketing arm of pharmaceutical companies. Here's one even more damning. They're all pretty bad, but Marcia Engel, former editor of New England Journal of Medicine, similarly criticized the industry for becoming primarily a marketing machine. She went on and said, explaining, it is no longer possible to believe much of the clinical research that is published or to rely on the judgment of trusted physicians or authoritative medical guidelines. She emphasized that she reached this conclusion slowly and reluctantly over her 2 decades of New England Journal of Medicine as editing that. So anyway, all kinds of interesting stuff going on. This is what Aaron Siri says, as a guiding principle, I've learned this: the more a product must be pushed, pressured, or forced upon people, the more thoughtfully and cautiously we should approach it. And this is another book. This is even more scary. This is something that really makes you think about a lot. Huge. Could this be the greatest crime against humanity in the history of our species? Here's something I think is really interesting. Okay, let me actually go here. I've got something. If we go back to this before. Okay, the Pfizer papers, edited by Naomi Wolf and also forwarded by Steve Bannon. Now, those are 2 people that I would have never imagined have collaborated. If Naomi Wolf, I would say she probably most famously and passionately would be a feminist. And in many good ways, you look at one of the wonderful things about a woman is just the marvelous power of creation. And this is one of the things that Naomi was all about. And then she started realizing that the COVID vax really messed up the reproductive systems of women. And so she got involved in stuff. And in fact, I was able to watch her on. So this is really interesting how people change with how things go along. And maybe I'll just read this to you. Might be the easiest thing. So let's just talk about Naomi Wolf. She has really been involved in feminism. Steve Bannon has a whole different idea, but all of us want to be free. And here's the thing that she talked about when she was actually came out with all of this stuff. And also, we've got to go back to Aaron Siri, because he successfully was able to get some papers that were done, put into Freedom of Information Act. There's some stuff that came out that the FDA and Pfizer specifically wanted to bury for 75 years. In fact, I'll just read this here. So Pfizer created, as part of a rollout of its mRNA injection, internal documents recording what happened to people who were injected with the vaccine. It was originally intended to keep all these documents hidden for 75 years after all the involved parties were gone. Okay, Aaron Siri pursued a successful lawsuit for the immediate release of these internal documents. Okay, imagine how much this is and why it was needed to have so many people collaborate. So Pfizer began releasing 55,000 documents a month. This is an unimaginable number, but some of those documents had up to 10,000 pages each. What was in these Pfizer documents? So here we go. In June of 2021, Naomi Wolf reported on the fact that women were experiencing menstrual symptoms subsequent to receiving the injection. It is not unusual for me to call attention to symptoms that women are having that are red flags. Anyone who knows 8th grade biology can tell that if a woman is having menstrual symptoms, there's going to be other bad things happening down the road. And so Twitter deplatformed her for this obvious observation. And she says, and while I was smeared globally, and it turns out another lawsuit subsequently found that it was the White House, CDC, possibly, and Twitter, all unlawfully colluding to deplatform and smear me for making this observation. So this is Naomi Wolf. So that got her very interested. With the release of all these documents, she wanted to do something about it. And so she called for experts to help get all of them, and miraculously, over 3,000 experts responded to the call. She says, we had physicians, we had RNs, we had biostatisticians, medical fraud investigators, lab coat clinicians, research scientists, cardiologists, pathologists, anesthesiologists, some of the most distinguished scientists and medical people imaginable. And it's virtually impossible to manage around 3,500 experts around the world, especially if you don't have this background wading through 55,000 documents a month. So again, the reason I tell the story is I really feel like something metaphysically beautifully is happening in the middle of something metaphysically hideous. That is 3,500 experts around the world organized into 6 working groups with a committee at the head of each who were busy churning out reports based on these primary source documents so that they could tell the world using the highest level of analysis possible, but broken down into language that everyone could understand what was in the Pfizer documents. And now is the sad part of what I have to tell you. The Pfizer documents contain evidence of the greatest crime against humanity in the history of our species, and I am so sorry to have to walk you through this, but there's no way around it. Some of the things that came to light, this is just some of the headlines. Pfizer knew, for instance, 1 month after rollout, so that's November of 2020, that the vaccine didn't work to stop COVID. Indeed, in the Pfizer documents, 1 month after rollout, and this is marketing, post-marketing, so it's out there. There's spokesmodels telling you to do it, ads in social media, ads are on television. A month after rollout, Pfizer's internal documents identify that vaccines have failure of efficacy. And they identify that the third most common side effect of the Pfizer vaccine is COVID. Wow. Okay, second headline. This is the second headline. This is stunning, is that within a month or two, Pfizer was getting so many reports of adverse effects, meaning bad things happening to people who had been injected, that they needed to hire on 2,400 full-time staffers in order to simply process the paperwork of the adverse effects that they were receiving reports on. Oh, wow. As well as prepare for the flood of adverse events that they knew they would get in the near future. Pfizer knew in May of 2021 that vaccines had caused heart damage in 35 minors within a week after injection. Pfizer knew that you'd got to understand that all of these documents They say FDA confidential at the bottom of them. So Pfizer and FDA shared these documents, and the FDA knew about the 35 minors sustaining heart damage. But the government of the United States, and she says, and I'm embarrassed to say I voted for these people, didn't tell parents until later about this elevated risk of heart damage in healthy young adults. Let's see, young adults, what do these young adults receive instead? A constant battery of propaganda on social media, on television, news outlets brought by many of the CARES Act, as well as from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, with like influencers showing off their injection sites, saying, we can do this together, we can be strong, do it for grandma. All of this aimed at young adults. They did not tell the young adults, the healthy young adults of the United States, your generation, that this is elevating a risk of heart damage. And remember, one of the side effects of the COVID vaccine was to get COVID. Just really interesting. You may recall that the CDC said that the materials and the injections stay in the injection site. The materials are lipid nanoparticles. They are mRNA. And the lipid nanoparticles are, anyway, let's see, let me skip up here. The CDC says that it remains at the injection site, and then it says, and remember asking doctors, like, what, she says, it seems like an ear for nonsense, she says, but what happens to it? And they would say, your body metabolizes it, or you digest it and excrete it, and they had no evidence to give me to show me the basis for the response. But in fact, that's not what happens to these materials, and Pfizer knew it. Using Pfizer's language, biodistribute, these materials biodistribute throughout the body in 48 hours. And where do they settle? Lipid nanoparticles are designed to cross every membrane in the body. They've known this for 10 years, and so where do these ingredients go? They go to the brain. Some of you have noticed changes in the personalities of loved ones who have taken the injections. They biodistribute to the liver, the adrenals, the spleen, and if you're a woman, they accumulate in your ovaries. And what's really scary, Dr. Robert Chandler, who's a respected pathologist, who's treated the Lakers and the Angels, he wrote this report. He shows that the chart shows that the graph going down as it leaves the injection site, but going up as it accumulates in all the various organs over time. And what's incredibly scary for a woman is that there is no mechanism that we found by which the body gets rid of the lipid nanoparticles out of the ovaries. So your first injection, some go to your ovaries, the second, more and more. So anyway, we could go on. We could talk about this for months and read lots of books, but I thought this could be some things to really think about, have informed choice, do your research, and it's just really interesting. I think back of all the years I've worked with really amazing, powerful supplements, and occasionally I get a question, is this approved by the FDA? And I think about the Pfizer reports with all of those papers on the bottom with FDA written on that. Anyway, lots to think about, but I think on the other hand, I really think wherever there's a problem, there's an opportunity. The bigger the problem, the bigger the opportunity. And I think a lot of our job is to be informed and educate, let other people know. But also, if there's problems, there can be solutions. And I'm excited to be in a place where I can make a positive difference. And I'm also excited that knowledge can be power to help you do things that you should do and maybe not do things that you shouldn't do. So anyway, I think one of my favorite thoughts is the key to success is to look at what everybody else is doing, study them, and do the opposite. So anyway, I hope you guys found some interest and got your brain thinking, and let's go make a difference. Let's be informed and make informed choices. Take care, everyone.